The emergency alert system triggered on my board at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. And I want to be clear about something. I didn't activate it. Nobody at KVRO activated it. The tone cut through my headphones mid-sentence, that three-burst attention signal, followed by the long, steady tone I'd heard 1,000 times in tests. Except the header code that printed across my screen wasn't a test. It wasn't a weather event. It wasn't an Amber Alert. The originator code read PEP, which is Primary Entry Point, which means the White House, which means the message was coming from the absolute top of the national chain. And in 9 years of pulling the overnight shift at a 1,400-watt AM station in Harmon, Oregon, population 6,000 and change, I had never once seen a PEP code on a live broadcast. My name is Owen Marsh. I was 34 years old. I hosted a show called After Midnight with Owen that ran from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. on a frequency most people in town had forgotten existed. I played deep cuts nobody requested, read local weather off a feed I barely understood, and talked to maybe 200 insomniacs and long-haul drivers who liked the sound of a human voice in the dark. That was my skill. Not engineering, not survival, not anything mechanical or structural or brave. I filled silence. That was the entire length of the resume. The EAS message played over my broadcast automatically. I couldn't have stopped it if I'd tried. The synthesized voice read a script I listened to with my hands flat on the console, fingers spread, like a man feeling for vibration through a wall. The message instructed residents of Western Oregon to shelter in place, avoid contact with any person displaying erratic motor behavior, and await further instruction from local emergency management. It repeated 3 times. Then it released the channel back to me. I sat there for 11 seconds with an open mic and didn't say a word. 11 seconds of dead air. In radio, that's an eternity. In 9 years, I'd never let more than 3 seconds pass without filling the gap. My program director, Rich Tanaka, used to say dead air was the only thing that could actually kill a station. People hear silence and they turn the dial. You exist because you speak. You vanish the moment you stop. I pressed the talk button. This is Owen Marsh on KVRO 1090 AM. If you just heard that, I heard it too. I don't have additional information. I'm going to stay on the air and tell you what I know as I know it. If anyone is listening and has details, the station number is on our website. Nobody called. I ran a song, Van Morrison, Into the Mystic, because it was next on the playlist and my hands were shaking too badly to search for anything else. While it played, I stood up and walked to the narrow window on the east side of the broadcast room. KVRO operated from the second floor of a repurposed concrete utility building at the base of a 200-foot guide radio tower on the eastern edge of Harmon, where Route 7 climbed toward the pass. The building was squat, blockish, poured in the 1960s for the county's civil defense relay. 2 floors. The first floor was storage, transmitter equipment, a dead diesel generator nobody had serviced since before I was hired, filing cabinets older than me. The second floor was the broadcast studio, 1 bathroom and a utility closet, 1 stairwell, 1 heavy steel exterior door at ground level. Emergency ladder bolted to the north side, ending at a second-floor window. From that east window, I could see the last quarter mile of Route 7 before it curved behind the hill. 1 streetlight. The road was empty. I was looking at it the way I always looked at it. Passively, the way you look at a screensaver, when a figure stepped into the cone of light and stopped. Not walking, not running, standing, head tilted at an angle that made the streetlight catch the wet surface of its face wrong. Something about the posture was off in a way I couldn't immediately name. The proportions were right. 2 arms, 2 legs, upright. But the weight distribution was wrong, like somebody standing on a surface they couldn't feel. It turned its head toward the building. I stepped back from the window. Van Morrison was still playing. The song had 40 seconds left. My mouth was dry and my hands were still shaking, and the figure under the streetlight Hadn't moved again, but it also hadn't stopped looking. I locked the ground floor door 17 minutes later. I want that gap on record because it matters. 17 minutes between seeing the first one and doing the only useful thing I did all night. I spent those 17 minutes sitting at the console, cycling between the AP wire feed and the station's landline, trying to reach Rich, trying to reach the Harmon Police Department non-emergency line, trying to reach anyone who could tell me whether what I'd seen under the streetlight was real or whether I was scaring myself with a drunk. Nobody picked up. The AP feed was looping the same EAS language with no additional detail. My cell had 2 bars and no service. I went downstairs with a flashlight. The first floor smelled like dust and old mineral oil. I pushed through the storage room to the steel exterior door, slid the deadbolt, and then dragged a filing cabinet in front of it. Not because I thought a filing cabinet would hold against anything, but because the noise of metal on concrete was the first sound I'd made that felt like action instead of talk. Then I climbed back upstairs, locked the stairwell door, sat down in my chair, and put my headphones on. The playlist had ended. Dead air. I'd let it run for almost 3 minutes without noticing. I pressed talk. KVRO 1090. This is Owen. It's 12:14 a.m. I can't reach the police department or any emergency line. If somebody is listening who knows what the EAS alert is about, I'm here. Call the station. The phone rang 9 minutes later. I nearly knocked the handset off the console reaching for it. KVRO, you're on with Owen. Owen, this is Vera Orozco. I own the pharmacy on 5th and Millard. Her voice was low, controlled, and slightly hoarse. Not panicked. Compressed. There are 3 of them outside my front door. They came from the direction of the hospital. They're not right. How? They move, but they don't breathe. I've been watching through the security glass for 20 minutes. Their chests don't rise. And they react to sound, Owen. I dropped a bottle behind the counter, and all 3 turned toward the wall closest to me at exactly the same time. Exactly. Like one signal. I pulled the phone closer. Are you locked in? Steel security gate, reinforced door. I close up alone at night. I've always had good locks. But I can see the street from here, and there are more coming from downtown. 7, 8, walking the center line. I looked at my console. The broadcast mic was still live. Vera, I need to tell you. You're on the air right now. I should have said that first. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking. She paused. 2 seconds. Then. Good. If anyone else is listening, stay inside. Lock your doors. Don't make noise. That was the first real broadcast, not me filling dead air with my own uncertainty. Vera Orozco, speaking from behind a pharmacy counter at 12:23 in the morning, giving the first clear instruction anyone in Harmon heard. I just held the phone to the mic and let her talk. When she finished, I asked if she could stay on the line. She said she'd keep her cell charged and call back every half hour. Then she hung up, and I was alone again in the broadcast room with the console lights and the hum of the transmitter and the knowledge that the world outside the building had changed while I was playing Van Morrison for nobody. I walked to the window. The streetlight was still on. The figure was gone, but the road wasn't empty anymore. I counted 4 shapes moving east along Route 7, spaced unevenly, all heading in the same general direction without apparent coordination. Toward the hills, toward nothing in particular, toward the tower. I stepped back from the window. I looked at the console. The transmitter power light glowed the same steady amber it had glowed for 9 years. 1,400 watts radiating outward in every direction from the antenna 200 feet above my head. Sound. Vera said it. The bottle behind the counter. 3 heads turning simultaneously. And I was sitting inside the loudest thing in Harmon. The next caller was a man named Pete Kessler, who identified himself as a retired county road supervisor and lived in a double-wide on the north side of town. He'd been listening to the broadcast since the EAS alert. He told me his neighbor had knocked on his door at 11:30, and when Pete opened it, the neighbor had grabbed his forearm and bitten down to the bone before Pete kicked him backward off the porch steps. The neighbor got up from a 6-foot fall without using his hands. Pete shot him with a .22 through the chest, and it didn't stop him. A second shot to the head did. Pete's voice was flat and informational. The voice of a man who had already organized the event into a sequence he could report. He gave me details. The bite, the blood, the time elapsed, the caliber, the point of impact. He said his arm was wrapped in a dish towel and electrical tape, and he couldn't feel his fingers anymore. "Pete, is anyone with you?" "Just me and Helen. She's in the back bedroom. She doesn't know about Daryl yet. I told her to stay put." "Can you get to a hospital?" "I'm not going outside again, Owen. You didn't see how he got up." I asked Pete to stay on the line. He agreed, but said his phone battery was at 31% and he wasn't going to waste it. He gave me his information, street address, number of people in the house, supplies on hand, and told me to broadcast it if anyone was organizing a response. Nobody was organizing a response. That was the thing I understood in the first hour, and spent the rest of the night pretending I didn't. The EAS had fired from the federal level, which meant this was national, which meant local emergency services were either overwhelmed or gone. The police non-emergency line rang without answer. The 911 circuit returned a busy signal, then nothing. Rich Tanaka's cell went to voicemail every time. I was not the right person for this. I need that understood. I had no medical training, no emergency management background, no tactical knowledge of any kind. I had a console, a microphone, and a transmitter bolted to a tower that was currently advertising my position to everything within signal range that hunted by sound. My qualification for the role I was about to assume was that I happened to be awake, happened to be on the air, and happened to have the only functioning broadcast infrastructure in a town that had just gone dark. Between 12:30 and 2 a.m., I received 11 calls. I logged each one on the back of a programming schedule with a ballpoint pen. Name, location, number of people, condition, supplies. The calls came from across Harmon. A woman in a second-floor apartment on Cedar with her 2 kids. A truck driver pulled over at the rest stop on Route 7 who said the highway was impassable west of the pass. A teenage boy alone in a house on Vine Street who told me his parents had gone to the hospital 6 hours ago and hadn't come back, and whose voice I can still hear if the room gets too quiet. I broadcast what I knew. Every 20 minutes, I keyed the mic and read the list. Locations that had checked in, streets that had reported movement, the one piece of tactical information I had. They responded to sound. Stay silent. Don't open your door. At 2:15, I looked out the east window and counted 9 figures on Route 7. They were closer than the last time I'd looked. Not running. Walking that same wrong-weighted gait, like people navigating by a sense that wasn't sight. They were oriented toward the tower. I understood it then. Every 20 minutes, I was keying a 1,400-watt transmitter that pushed signal through a 200-foot antenna. The broadcast wasn't just reaching people. It was reaching them. I was saving lives and painting a target on my own roof, with the same action, the same thumb on the same button. And there was no version of the math where both of those things could continue indefinitely. I broadcast anyway, because the boy on Vine Street was still listening, and I told him I'd be here. By 4 a.m., I had 23 names on my list. 23 households, 41 confirmed people, spread across a town that was coming apart in the dark. I knew this because they told me. Every call added detail to a map I was building on the back of old ad copy. Streets marked with X's for confirmed infected presence, circles for survivor positions, arrows for observed movement patterns. The patterns worried me. The infected weren't random. They drifted toward noise, yes, but they also clustered along certain corridors. Main Street, the hospital access road, the elementary school parking lot. Places where sound had been. Car alarms that had triggered and died. A church with an automated bell system that chimed at midnight. Echoes of a world that was still making noise on a timer while the people who'd set those timers were already gone. Vera called back at 3:45. She'd been rationing her phone battery, timing her check-ins. Her voice was the same controlled compression as before, but I could hear something underneath it now. Not panic, fatigue. The specific fatigue of sustained vigilance. "I counted 19 passing the front window since we last spoke," she said. "They've thinned out. Most of them moved west toward the highway. But there's a cluster of 4 that haven't moved from the intersection. They're just standing there, facing your direction, Owen." I didn't respond to that immediately. I wrote it down. 4 stationary, facing east, facing the tower. "I need to ask you something," I said. "And I want you to think about it before you answer. Do you think the broadcast is drawing them?" Vera was quiet for 3 seconds. "Yes. I've been watching the ones that pass. When you key the mic, the ones in range change direction. It's not instant. It takes maybe 30 seconds. But they orient towards you, and they start moving. How far out does it reach? The effect, I can see about 4 blocks from here. The ones at the edge of my visibility react. Beyond that, I don't know." I sat with that. 4 blocks minimum. The tower signal carried much farther than 4 blocks. KVRO's ground wave covered most of Harmon Valley and kicked into the lower hills. But the infected response radius might be limited to proximity with the antenna itself, the source of the electromagnetic emission, the physical hum of the equipment. I didn't know enough about the physics to be sure. I was a DJ, not an engineer. "Vera, if I go dark, if I stop broadcasting, the people who are listening lose their only source of information. And if you keep broadcasting, you pull every one of those things toward the one building that's keeping the information flowing. So what do I do?" She didn't answer that. She didn't owe me an answer. She said, "I'll call back in 30 minutes, and hung up. I turned to the mic. The broadcast light was on. I'd been talking to Vera on the air. Everyone had heard. The boy on Vine Street had heard me admit that my voice might be the thing that got us killed. I keyed the mic. "This is Owen on KVRO. I'm going to go quiet for a while. If you're listening, stay where you are. Keep your lights off and your doors locked. I'll be back on the air at 5 a.m. 1 hour. I need to see what happens when the signal stops." I reached over and switched off the transmitter. The amber light died. The hum that I'd stopped consciously hearing years ago went silent, and the room changed. Not the temperature, not the light, the texture. The air in the room settled into a stillness it hadn't held since I'd walked in 9 years ago for my first shift. I sat in the dead studio and waited. I walked to the window every 10 minutes and counted. At 4:20, 14 figures on Route 7 and the surrounding road. At 4:30, 11. At 4:40, 8. They were dispersing, slowly, unevenly, like a crowd losing interest in a street performer who'd stopped playing. The silence was working. The silence was also killing me, because my phone buzzed 3 times during that hour with texts from numbers I didn't recognize, and every one of them said some version of the same thing. "Are you still there?" I turned the transmitter back on at 5 a.m. The amber light returned. The hum resumed. I keyed the mic and said, "I'm here." Within 40 minutes, I counted 22 figures on the road, more than before I'd gone dark. They'd dispersed during the silence, and now they were returning, and they'd brought others with them from wherever they'd drifted in the interim. The experiment had worked, and the experiment had made it worse. And I understood with nauseating clarity that this was not a problem I could solve. I could broadcast and draw them. I could go silent and lose the people depending on me. There was no third option. There was no version of this where both sides of the equation balanced. I was the loudest thing in a town that had learned to hunt by sound, and the only people left alive needed me to keep being loud. The first person to physically reach the tower was Dale Morrow, and he arrived at 6:10 a.m. with a fire axe, a canvas bag of canned food, and a woman named Connie Park, who had a compound fracture of her left wrist set with a broom handle and packing tape. I heard them before I saw them. 3 heavy knocks on the steel door downstairs. Then a voice. "Owen Marsh, I've been listening. My name is Dale Morrow. I'm retired Harmon Fire, Station 2. I've got an injured woman with me. We need inside." I went to the window. 2 figures at the base of the building. Dale was tall, late 50s, gray stubble, wearing a denim jacket over a Harmon Fire Department t-shirt. Connie was leaning against the wall, holding her left arm against her body with her right. Behind them, maybe 300 yards east on Route 7, 4 infected were moving in their direction at the same wrong-gated walk. I went downstairs. I shoved the filing cabinet aside and opened the deadbolt and let them in. Dale came through first, pulling Connie behind him. I slammed the bolt home and dragged the cabinet back. Dale looked at the door, the cabinet, the building. His eyes did a structural survey in about 4 seconds. "This won't hold." "I know." "How many are out there?" I counted 22 on the road at 5:40, more in the surrounding streets. He nodded like that was a weather report. Then he looked at Connie. "She needs real splinting. The broom handle is temporary. You got a first aid kit? Bathroom upstairs. It's a commercial wall unit. Might have a splint." Dale took Connie upstairs. I followed. While Dale worked on her arm in the bathroom, I went back to the console. The transmitter was still on. I'd been off the mic for 20 minutes. I keyed the mic. "This is Owen. 2 survivors have reached the tower. Dale Morrow, retired Harmon Fire, and Connie Park. If anyone else is trying to move, be advised. The infected respond to sound, and the tower signal is drawing concentrated activity to this area. Approach from the north side. There's an equipment yard with a concrete wall that blocks line of sight from Route 7. Knock 3 times on the steel door. I'll be listening." Dale came out of the bathroom and stood behind my chair. He listened to me finish the broadcast, then said, "You just told them to come here. They're going to come anyway. At least this way, they don't walk into the cluster on the road. And every one of them that moves makes noise. And every noise draws more of those things toward where we're sending the people." "I know." Dale sat down on a plastic milk crate against the wall. He was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been on the air?" "Since 11:47 last night. The EAS triggered during my show." "Have you slept?" "No." "Eaten?" I looked at the console. There was a half-empty bag of dry roasted peanuts and a thermos of coffee I'd brought from home 12 hours ago. Dale saw it and said nothing, but his expression adjusted slightly, the look of a man recalibrating from admiration to concern. "The building has 2 floors, I said. "This room, the bathroom, a utility closet. Downstairs is storage and the transmitter equipment. 1 entrance, 1 emergency ladder on the north side. The walls are poured concrete 8 inches. The door is steel. It'll hold for a while," Dale repeated. "That's what I've got." A while. Connie came out of the bathroom with her arm in an improvised sling made from a strip of broadcast room curtain. She was pale, mid-40s. Her jaw set in the way of someone who had decided not to acknowledge pain until pain acknowledged her first. "How many people are you in contact with?" she asked. 23 households. 41 people confirmed. Any of them moving?" "Not yet. I told everyone to shelter in place." "But you told anyone who's already moving to come here?" "Yes." Connie looked at Dale. Dale looked at me. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, which was that I had just converted a narrow concrete building with 1 exit into a destination, and every person who arrived would bring sound with them, and every sound would bring the infected. And I was orchestrating the whole convergence from behind a microphone, because it was the only thing I knew how to do. "I can help with the door," Dale said. "There's equipment downstairs I can brace it with. But I need to know. Are you going to keep broadcasting?" "Yes." Even knowing what it draws. People are listening, Dale. They're in their houses, alone, in the dark. I'm the only voice they've got." He looked at me for a long time. Then he stood up, picked up his fire axe, and went downstairs. The second group arrived at 7:40 a.m. 3 people, a young couple named Marcus and Tanya Vidal, and Tanya's younger brother, a 17-year-old named Eli. They came from the north side, following my instructions. Eli had a cut across his forehead that Connie cleaned and butterflied, while Dale showed Marcus how to brace the downstairs door with a section of old transmitter racking. By 8 a.m., we were 7 people in a building designed for one. Dale had organized the downstairs into a functional barricade. Marcus, who turned out to have 2 years of Army National Guard service before washing out, helped him reinforce the door with angle iron stripped from the dead generator mounting. Connie, despite her arm, inventoried our supplies. The answer was bad. My peanuts, Dale's canned goods, 2 water bottles Marcus had in a backpack, and whatever came out of the bathroom tap, which was still running on city pressure, but wouldn't be for long. I stayed at the console. I stayed because that was where I was useful, and because I was beginning to understand that useful was the only currency I had. Dale could build, Marcus could lift, Connie could organize. Eli, it turned out, could draw. He sat in the corner with a scrap of paper and sketched a precise overhead map of the streets between the tower and town center from memory, marking every infected sighting he'd observed during their trip. It was better than my map, more accurate, detailed in a way that came from actually moving through the streets instead of hearing about them through a phone. Everyone had a thing they could do except talk, and talking was all I had. At 8:15, the phone rang. The boy from Vine Street. His name was Jordan. He was 15. He told me his name now because I asked for it. And I asked for it because at some point during the night, I'd understood that names were the only difference between a broadcast and a eulogy. "I can see them from my bedroom window," Jordan said. "There are a lot more than before. They're all heading east. East is us. East is the tower." "I know." "Jordan, is there anyone else on your street?" "Mrs. Kaufman across the road. She flashed her upstairs light at me about an hour ago. She's old. I don't think she can move fast." "Are you thinking about going to get her?" He was quiet for 5 seconds. "I'm thinking I can't stay here and know she's over there alone. Listen to me. If you go outside, do not make noise. Do not run unless you have to. Move slowly and stay close to buildings. They track sound, but they also respond to fast movement. If they orient toward you, freeze. Hold your breath. Wait." "How do you know that?" "Vera Orozco told me. She's been watching from the pharmacy." "Is she okay?" "She was 2 hours ago." More silence. Then, "If I get Mrs. Kaufman, where do I take her?" I looked at the map Eli had drawn. Vine Street was 14 blocks west. 14 blocks of open road, intersections, sight lines. 14 blocks toward a building that was already becoming a target. "Bring her here if you can. But Jordan, if the route looks bad, find somewhere closer. Any interior room, any structure with a solid door. Don't take risks for a destination. Survive in place if you have to, okay? Jordan, call me when you're moving. I'll go dark for your transit. No broadcast. No signal to pull them your direction." He paused. "But then the other people listening won't have you." "I know. But you'll be outside and they won't." He hung up. I sat back in my chair and felt the weight of what I'd just offered. Silence as protection for one boy, purchased by abandoning 41 people who were depending on my voice to feel less alone. Every choice I made now had that structure. Every act of care for one person was a withdrawal from every other person simultaneously, and the account was not infinite, and the balance was getting smaller every hour. Dale came upstairs. He looked at me. He'd heard the whole thing on the broadcast room speaker. "He's 15, Dale said. "I know. You told him to come here." "I told him to survive. Coming here was one option." Dale leaned against the doorframe. "How long can you keep doing this?" "Doing what?" "Being the voice. Being the reason people move. Being the thing they walk toward in a town where walking gets you killed." I didn't have an answer. I had a microphone and a list of names and a transmitter that wouldn't stop humming until the power grid collapsed or the infected climbed the stairwell. Whichever happened first. Jordan made it. He reached the tower at 10:50 a.m. with Mrs. Kaufman. Margaret, she insisted, and a canvas tote bag containing 4 cans of soup, a transistor radio, a Bible, and a snub-nosed .38 revolver she'd been licensed to carry since 1987. She was 73, moved slowly, spoke precisely, and the first thing she said when Dale helped her through the door was, "That boy carried me across 8th Street on his back. You should know that." Jordan wouldn't talk about the crossing. He sat on the floor near Eli and drank water from a paper cup and stared at the wall. He was shaking. Not the shaking of cold. The shaking of a body processing something the mind hadn't caught up to yet. I'd gone dark for 47 minutes during his transit. Killed the transmitter, sat in the silent studio, and watched the window. The infected on Route 7 had dispersed again during the silence, drifting outward, losing focus, milling in the aimless pattern that seemed to be their resting state. When I brought the transmitter back up at 10:52, 2 minutes after Jordan came through the door, I watched them reorient. Heads turning, bodies pivoting. The slow, inexorable drift back toward the tower beginning again. The intervals were getting shorter. During my first silence, the 1-hour test before dawn, it had taken the infected roughly 40 minutes to disperse meaningfully. This time, 47 minutes of silence had produced maybe 15 minutes of real dispersal before they started clustering again. They were learning the pattern. Or not learning, adapting. Something in their response was becoming more efficient. The way a compass needle finds north faster the second time you spin it. I keyed the mic and broadcast the update. 9 households, still checking in. The others had gone silent over the past 2 hours. Phones dead, batteries gone, or worse. Vera called at 11:15 and reported the pharmacy block was clear for the first time since midnight, all infected having moved east. Toward me. "They're draining from the town center," she said. "You're pulling them like gravity." "I know. Owen, that means the routes between here and there are opening up. People could move." "Toward what?" "The building that's collecting every one of those things." Vera was quiet. Then, "West, toward the highway. If you keep broadcasting from the east, you pull them east. The western corridor's clear. People move west." I understood what she was saying, and the simplicity of it was stunning. The tower wasn't a shelter. It was a decoy. I could use the signal to pull the infected in one direction while everyone else moved in the other. The math was obvious, and it was also the math of sacrifice, because the longer I broadcast, the more of them would arrive at my door. And there was no version of the plan where I walked west with everyone else. "I need to think about that," I said. "Don't think too long. The window is now." I looked at Dale. He was standing behind me. He'd heard. "She's right," he said. "I know she's right. So broadcast. Pull them east. Give the western route time to open. And then we figure out how to get out of this building before the whole town is standing outside the door." "That's not a plan, Dale. That's the first half of a plan that ends in a question mark. Every plan I ever ran at a fire ended in a question mark. You build to the wall, and then you see the wall." I turned back to the mic. "KVRO to all listeners. Survival advisory. Western routes out of Harmon appear to be clearing as infected activity concentrates east toward the tower signal. If you are able to move and have a safe western exit, consider beginning transit now. Move quietly. Move in small groups. Avoid main roads where possible. I'll maintain the broadcast to hold their attention east. Go now if you're going." I said it clearly, and I said it calmly, and I didn't say what everyone listening already understood, which was that I was telling them to save themselves by leaving me behind. The teenager's name was Maddie Clearwater. She called at 1:15 p.m. from inside the Harmon High School science wing, where she'd been locked in a second-floor chemistry lab since 8 the previous evening. She was alone. She'd been part of a group of 6 students and a teacher who had sheltered in the school when the first infected reached the campus. The others had tried to reach the gym, where the exterior doors were heavier. Maddie had stayed in the lab. She'd heard sounds from the direction of the gym for about an hour, Then nothing. She was calm in the way that scared me most. Not suppressed panic, but the eerie composure of someone who had passed through fear and come out the other side into a flat, affectless stillness. "I can see the parking lot from the window," she said. "There are 11 of them. They're not moving much, just standing near the buses." "Have they tried to get into the building?" "They were inside the building. I heard them on the first floor most of the night. They went quiet around dawn, and I think most of them went outside, but I don't know if all of them did." I looked at Eli's map. The high school was 8 blocks south-southwest of the tower. Not on the western evacuation route. Not on any route I'd described. Maddie was in a pocket. Isolated, elevated, temporarily safe. And completely outside the corridor I'd just told everyone else to move through. "Maddie, I need you to stay where you are for right now. The science wing. Does the door lock from the inside?" "It has a deadbolt. The teacher's key was on the desk. I locked it last night." "Good. Keep it locked. Don't make noise. I'm going to figure out how to get you out." "Get me out how?" "I'm on the 2nd floor above a parking lot full of those things." I didn't have an answer. Dale was listening from the stairwell landing. He came into the room and leaned over my shoulder and looked at Eli's map. "The school connects to the field house through a covered walkway," he said. "North side. The field house has a ground-level door that opens onto the athletic fields. Fields run north to the tree line along Deschutes Creek. Creek bed runs east about a half-mile and comes out near the water treatment access road. That road connects to Route 7 south of us. That's a 1.5 miles through open ground, through a creek bed with 8-foot banks. Cover the whole way." I looked at Dale. "You're talking about going to get her." "I'm talking about somebody going to get her. She's 17, Owen. She's alone in a locked room above a parking lot full of dead people. And if you go out there and don't come back, we lose the only person in this building who knows how to keep the door standing." Dale straightened up. His expression didn't change. "Marcus can hold the door. Marcus has been here for 4 hours. You've been doing this your whole life. It's not the same." "So what? We leave her?" The room was quiet. Connie was in the doorway. Margaret was sitting against the wall, her hands folded in her lap, the .38 somewhere in her tote bag. Jordan and Eli were on the floor near the window. Everyone was listening. I keyed the mic. "Maddie, are you still there?" "I'm here. I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it exactly the way I describe. Go to the window facing north. Tell me what you see between the school and the field house." Rustling. Footsteps. A pause. The covered walkway. It's open-sided, like a breezeway. I can see through to the fields on the other side. There's nothing in the walkway right now. "What about the fields?" "Empty. Grass and the track. I can see the creek tree line maybe 200 yards past the track." I looked at Dale. He was already putting on his jacket. "Dale is coming to get you," I said. "When he reaches the school, he'll be at the north exterior of the science wing. 2nd floor windows. Can any of them open?" "They crank out, old style." "Good. Crank one open and hang something visible. A lab coat, a backpack. Something he can see from the ground. He'll signal when he's there. When you see him, go to the north stairwell. Not the main stairs, the back stairs near the fire exit, and come down to the covered walkway. Go quietly. If anything moves, stop. Dale will handle it from there." Maddie was quiet. Then, "Why is he coming for me?" Dale took the mic from my hand. His voice was different on the air than it was in person. Slower, more deliberate, with a grain to it that sounded like something you could hold on to. "Because I know the field house door," he said. "And because someone should." He handed the mic back and went downstairs. I heard him tell Marcus what to do with the barricade. I heard the filing cabinet scrape. I heard the deadbolt slide. I heard the door open and close and the deadbolt slide again from outside. Dale had taken the key. I killed the transmitter. Full silence. If Dale was moving through 8 blocks of open ground, I wasn't going to be the reason the things in the parking lot woke up and started walking. The studio went dead. I sat in the silence and watched the clock and tried not to count the minutes because counting would make them longer. And Dale was out there with a fire axe and a set of keys, moving through a town that had become a hunting ground, moving toward a girl he'd never met because she was 17 and alone, and because someone should. Dale brought Maddie in through the north side emergency ladder at 3:22 p.m. I heard the rattle of metal, the window sliding open, and then Maddie was in the broadcast room, breathing hard, her eyes moving around the space in fast sweeps, cataloging everything: the console, the people, the cans on the floor, the window with the curtain pulled. Dale came in behind her, winded but intact. "Creek bed took us within 400 yards, he said. "Open sprint across the equipment yard." Marcus had the door ready. Maddie stood in the center of the room and looked at the console, looked at me. "You're Owen Marsh." "Yeah. I used to listen to your show sometimes when I couldn't sleep." She said it the way you'd mention recognizing a cashier from the grocery store. Not admiration, familiarity. "You play old music nobody listens to. That's the show." We were 10 people now. 10 people in 2 floors of a concrete building, with a transmitter bolted to a tower above our heads that was simultaneously the most important and most dangerous piece of equipment in 40 miles. I sat down at the console and brought the transmitter back up. 2 hours and 11 minutes of silence, the longest I'd gone dark since the EAS alert. I keyed the mic. "KVRO 1090 AM. This is Owen. I'm back. We have 10 people at the tower. Dale Morrow has returned with a survivor from Harmon High. I went dark for 2 hours to provide cover, and I'm now resuming broadcast." The window. I walked to it. Route 7 was almost clear. 2 figures, far east, near the hill curve. The long silence had scattered them more thoroughly than any previous blackout, dispersing them into the surrounding landscape where they milled without purpose. But I was watching. I knew the clock. I'd been tracking the pattern all day. First silence, 60 minutes dark, 40 minutes to meaningful dispersal, reconcentration within 20 minutes of resumption. Second silence, 47 minutes dark, 15 minutes to partial dispersal, reconcentration within 15 minutes. Third silence, 2 hours, 11 minutes dark, near complete dispersal, but I watched. 16 minutes after I brought the transmitter back up, the first figure appeared at the far curve of Route 7. 22 minutes, 3 more. 30 minutes, 9. They came faster every time. The dispersal was deeper after the long silence, yes, but the reconcentration was faster too. They were calibrating. Whatever mechanism guided them toward sound was becoming more efficient with each cycle, like a muscle being trained. I wrote the numbers on my log sheet. Resumption to first return, 16 minutes. Resumption to cluster threshold, 10 plus, 33 minutes. Projected time to critical mass at door, 90 minutes. Maybe less. I showed the numbers to Dale. He read them standing up, his fire axe leaning against his leg. "So, every time you turn that thing on, we have about an hour and a half before they're at the door. And that window is shrinking. How fast? I don't know. But every cycle, the reconcentration is faster. It was 40 minutes this morning, 33 just now. If the rate holds, by tonight, it could be under 20. Dale looked at the transmitter, looked at the mic, looked at me. "Then we need to not be here by tonight." I turned to the room. 10 faces. Connie with her broken wrist. Margaret with her tote bag. Jordan, who had carried an old woman across 8th Street on his back. Eli, whose map was now the most accurate picture of Harmon that existed anywhere. Maddie, who had spent 18 hours locked in a chemistry lab, listening to the sounds of her classmates dying 2 hallways away, and didn't talk about it, and wouldn't talk about it, and shouldn't have to talk about it. "Vera," I said. I reached for the phone. She picked up on the second ring. "I heard," she said. "You're running out of time. I need to know what the western route looks like. Have you seen movement since this morning? Almost nothing. 3 past the pharmacy around noon, heading east. Since then, the block has been silent. Owen, I've been monitoring the scanner. I picked up a fragment 2 hours ago. Military frequency. I couldn't make out the words, but the call sign was Tango Lima 7. It repeated 3 times. Structured, not random. Military. Where? I don't know. The signal was weak. Could be 50 miles out, could be 200. But someone is out there, and they're using organized comms. I wrote down the call sign. Tango Lima 7. It meant nothing to me, but it meant someone was broadcasting from the other end, and someone was listening. And in a world that had gone to dead air, any structured signal was a door. By 5 p.m., the math had become very simple. The reconcentration time after my last broadcast resumption was 26 minutes. I was losing 7 minutes per cycle. At that rate, by midnight, the infected would be at the door before I finished a single broadcast. The window between speaking and consequence was collapsing, and there was nothing I could do to slow it, because the mechanism wasn't mechanical. It was behavioral. They were adapting to the pattern of a signal that disappeared and reappeared, and each repetition taught them to respond faster. I explained this to the group at 5:15. I used the numbers. I didn't soften them. We can stay here and go silent permanently, I said. Kill the transmitter. Don't broadcast. But the people who are listening, and there are people listening, I still have at least 9 households checking in. Lose everything. No information, no route guidance, no voice. Or, Dale said. Or I keep broadcasting and we figure out how to leave before the interval closes completely. Marcus stood up. What about broadcasting from somewhere else? Somewhere that isn't here. The transmitter is bolted to a 200-foot tower. It's not portable. But you've got a phone. You've got Vera relaying information. Do you need the tower? The tower reaches the entire valley. My phone reaches whoever I can call individually. It's the difference between a signal and a conversation. If I go to phone only, I lose everyone I haven't already spoken to. The people who are listening right now that I don't have numbers for. The ones who just heard the AM frequency and held on. I lose them all. The room was quiet. Eli was sitting on the floor, updating his map with new information from Maddie's observations of the school area. Jordan was beside Margaret, who had fallen asleep against the wall with a tote bag in her lap. Tanya Vidal, who had barely spoken since arriving, said, "How many people are we talking about? The ones you can't reach by phone?" "I don't know. That's the point. I don't know who's listening. It could be 10. It could be 300. So you're risking 10 real lives in this room for a number that might be 0. Nobody responded. Tanya's math was correct. It was also the kind of calculation that turns people into numbers. And I'd spent the last 18 hours learning that numbers were the things I was worst at. "She's not wrong," Connie said quietly. "But the reason we're all in this room is because you were on the air. If you'd gone dark at midnight, none of us would have found each other." Dale cut in before the discussion could fracture further. "Here's what I know. The door downstairs will hold for maybe 30 minutes under sustained pressure. The walls are 8-inch concrete. They're not getting through the walls. That means the failure point is the door. The ground floor windows, which are small but not impossible, and the north side emergency ladder. I can disable the ladder. I've already reinforced the door. The windows I can barricade with the generator casing. How long does that buy us? Against a crowd? Hours, not days. Against a few at a time. Could be a long time. They don't use tools, they push. If the reinforcement holds against the pressure, we're okay until they stack high enough to reach the second-floor window." "Stack," Maddie said. "They don't climb, but they crowd. And a crowd against a building gets taller at the edges. I saw it at the school. The ones in the parking lot were pressed against the gym wall 3 deep. If enough of them accumulate here, the second-floor window becomes reachable." I looked at the clock. 5:22. I'd been off the air for 7 minutes. Every minute of silence was a minute the interval reset. Every minute of silence was also a minute. Someone in a dark house was sitting alone, without a voice to tell them they weren't the last person alive. I keyed the mic. KVRO, Owen Marsh. Quick update, then I'm going to go dark again. We have 10 survivors at the tower. Western routes out of Harmon have been mostly clear since this afternoon. If you can move west, move now. If you need route information, I'll be back on the air at 6 p.m. for a 5-minute window. 5 minutes only. Conserve your movement. Be ready. I switched off the transmitter. The hum died. I wrote 5:23 p.m. on my log sheet and drew a line. 5-minute windows, I said. That's the new format. I broadcast for 5 minutes, then go dark. The shorter the transmission, the less time they have to orient. Does that work? Marcus asked. I don't know. But the alternative is hour-long broadcasts that stack them at the door, or permanent silence that abandons everyone still listening. Dale nodded. 5 minutes. Then we start planning our own exit. At 6 p.m., I brought the transmitter up for the first 5-minute window. I spoke fast. I read off the route information Vera had provided. 2 western corridors she confirmed as clear from her observation point. A bridge crossing on Mill Creek Road that a caller had reported open, and the military call sign Tango Lima 7 that she'd intercepted. I told everyone listening that the tower group would attempt to move after dark. I told them to head west if they could. I told them I would broadcast one more time at 8 p.m. I was mid-sentence when Vera called. Owen, stop! Stop talking! Killed the mic. What? They're running. I went to the window. In the dim orange of early dusk, I could see Route 7. The figures on the road were not walking. They were running. Not the shambling, wait-wrong gait I'd catalogued for 18 hours. Full, committed sprinting. Fast enough that the distance between the hill curve and the tower base would close in minutes, not the 30 I'd been calculating. Vera, when did this start? Right now, when you keyed the mic. Owen? They heard the signal come back from 5 minutes, and then silence, and then 5 minutes again, and this time, they didn't walk. They ran. They're adapting to the short bursts. They know the signal is temporary, and they're compensating. I looked at my log sheet. The neat decline of reconcentration times. 40 minutes. 33. 26. I'd been tracking the wrong variable. I'd been measuring how fast they returned. I should have been measuring how fast they accelerated. The pattern of short bursts had taught them urgency. My clever 5-minute format had done the opposite of what I intended. It had trained them to sprint. Everyone downstairs, Dale said. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. Everyone heard his tone. Marcus, barricade check. Connie, get Margaret moving. Jordan, Eli, Maddie. 2nd floor hallway, away from the windows. I stayed at the console. I stayed because I had 6 seconds of broadcast left, and someone might be listening, and those 6 seconds might be the last thing I ever said on the air. KVRO, all listeners. They're running now. Short bursts don't work. I'm going dark indefinitely. If you're hearing this, move west. Don't wait for me. Don't wait for the next broadcast. Go now. This is Owen Marsh. Good luck. I killed the transmitter. The amber light went dark. And in the silence that followed, I heard the first impact on the ground floor door. Not a knock, not a push. A collision. A body hitting steel at full sprint. Then another, then a third. The sound transmitted through the concrete walls and up through the floor and into my feet. And it was the sound a building makes, when something is trying to enter it faster than the building was designed to withstand. Dale was downstairs. I heard his voice through the floor, calm, direct, instructional. Marcus, brace the left side. Get your shoulder into the racking. It'll flex before it breaks. When it flexes, you push back. Don't let it bow. More impacts. The rhythm was irregular, not coordinated, but relentless. Each hit was a separate body arriving at the door independently. The accumulated mass of every infected person on Route 7 converging on the same 8-foot wide surface simultaneously. I stood in the broadcast room. The mic was dead. The transmitter was dead. I was standing in the thing I was supposed to be. A radio host. A voice. The loud thing in a quiet world. And I had nothing left to say, and no one left to say it to. And outside the concrete walls, the consequence of everything I'd said was throwing itself at the only door. Then the south-facing ground floor window broke. I heard the glass go. Not a shatter. A sustained cracking, then a collapse. Then the wet sound of bodies pressing through a space too small for them, forcing themselves through anyway, because the concept of fitting through a window requires a body that knows it has edges, and these bodies didn't. Marcus screamed. Dale's voice. Up, upstairs, now, everyone up the stairs now. Footsteps on concrete. The stairwell door opening. Dale pushing Connie through. Marcus behind him bleeding from the forearm. Margaret being half carried by Jordan. Eli pulling Maddie by the hand. Dale came through last and slammed the stairwell door and threw the lock. That lock is residential grade, Dale said. 5 minutes. We were 10 people in a broadcast room with no active transmitter and a residential grade lock between us and the stairwell and the building filling from below with the things my voice had spent 18 hours pulling in from every corner of Harmon. Marcus was bleeding from a gash on his forearm where the window frame had caught him. Not a bite. A glass wound he kept checking and rechecking, as if the distinction between glass and teeth was the only thing keeping him upright. Tanya wrapped it with strips torn from the curtain while he looked at the blood and said nothing. The emergency ladder, Dale said. North side. I disabled it earlier. Pulled the lowest section free so they couldn't climb up from the ground. But we can reattach it from the second floor window and go down. Down to what? Maddie said. They surrounded the building. The north side may still be clear. The door and windows are south-facing. That's where the impact is. If they're concentrating on the entry points they've already found. Below us, the stairwell door flexed. Not the sound of a fist, the sound of mass pressing forward, each body pushed by the bodies behind it. Hydraulic pressure, the dead weight of a crowd, with no concept of capacity. We don't have time to debate this, Dale said. Owen, can you transmit from something else? Anything? I looked at the console, at the dead transmitter, at the equipment rack. Then I looked at the shelf above the mixing board, where Rich Tanaka kept an old portable AM broadcasting unit, a Part 15 compliant microtransmitter he'd used for parking lot promotions, battery-powered. Effective range maybe 200 feet. Useless for reaching the valley, but not useless for reaching the things at the base of the building. I can broadcast from the portable unit, I said. 200 feet. If someone carries it south, away from the tower, it might pull some of them away from the building. Dale looked at me. You're talking about a decoy. I'm talking about a speaker and a battery that can carry my voice 200 feet from the building while we go out the north side. Who carries it? Nobody carries it. I drop it out the south window. Pre-record a loop on the studio deck. Tape the mic open. Drop the whole unit. It transmits from the ground south while we exit north. The stairwell door flexed again. The lock plate was beginning to deform. Dale didn't discuss it. He moved. He pulled the portable unit off the shelf, connected the handheld mic, and taped the talk button open with electrical tape. I pulled the studio recorder, an ancient reel-to-reel for nostalgia, and spoke into it for 60 seconds. Just talk. Just my voice. Weather and traffic and song introductions, the meaningless patter of a late-night AM show, the sound of a man who isn't afraid and isn't going anywhere and will keep talking as long as anyone is listening. Dale dropped the unit out the south window. It hit the pavement and bounced, and the micro-transmitter started pushing my recorded voice into the air at 100 milliwatts. And I watched from the north window as 3, then 5, then 8 of the figures below peeled away from the building and moved toward the small, tinny sound of my voice coming from the ground 30 feet south of the wall. Go, Dale said. Ladder, now. He reattached the lowest section of the emergency ladder and went first, axe slung across his back. Connie next, one-armed, grimacing. Marcus lowered Margaret to Dale's waiting hands 3 rungs down. Jordan, Eli, Maddie, Tanya, Marcus. I was last. I stood at the open window with one foot on the ladder and looked back at the broadcast room, the console, the chair, the coffee-stained programming schedule I'd used to log 41 names, the reel-to-reel turning, feeding 60 seconds of my voice into a loop that would play until the battery died. Below me, the stairwell door finally gave. I heard the lock plate tear free and the doors slam inward and the sound of bodies filling the stairwell like water rising in a pipe. I went out the window and down the ladder, and my feet hit the ground, and Dale grabbed my arm and said, "Creek bed, east, now." We ran. 10 people in the dark, heading east toward Deschutes Creek, the opposite direction from every instruction I'd given the rest of Harmon. Behind us, my voice played on a loop from a device the size of a lunchbox, drawing the dead toward a sound that would repeat until the batteries corroded. The last broadcast of a station that had already been forgettable before the world ended. Then my phone rang. An unknown number. I answered it while running. Owen Marsh? A woman's voice. Steady. Professional. A voice trained for communications. Who is this? My name is Angie Brandt. I'm a volunteer radio relay operator embedded with the 41st Infantry Brigade Combat Team out of Joint Base Lewis McChord. I've been monitoring your frequency for 14 hours. A pharmacist in your town has been relaying your broadcasts to us on a shortwave sideband. I stopped running. Dale pulled my arm. I didn't move. You've been listening? We've been logging. Your broadcasts gave us a real-time infection density map for Harmon Valley. You've been painting the tactical picture better than our own recon assets. Command is aware of your location. A QRF element has been staged at the Madras airport since this morning, waiting for conditions. You, Mr. Marsh. They needed you to keep transmitting so they could triangulate the density center. The infected concentrate where the signal is. That tells us where they aren't. The corridors you've been clearing with your silence are the same corridors our teams need to move through. You've been running the most effective area denial operation in the state, and you didn't know it. I stood in the dark on the edge of a creek bank with 9 people waiting behind me and the sound of my own voice playing on a loop from a building I'd just fled, and a woman I'd never met told me that the thing I thought was killing us had been saving everyone else the whole time. "What do you need me to do?" I said. "We need you to broadcast. One more time. From wherever you are. With whatever you have. Key up, stay on the air as long as you can. Pull them toward you. When we see the concentration shift on our end, we launch. I don't have the tower anymore. I have a phone. Then put the phone on speaker and we'll relay through your cell signal. It won't reach the valley, but we can cross-reference your cell tower ping with the micro-transmitter loop you left behind. 2 sources, 2 concentration points. It gives us the lane." I looked at Dale. He'd heard enough. He didn't say anything. He just set down the fire axe and sat on the creek bank and waited for me to decide. I want to describe what it felt like. But the truth is, it didn't feel like anything. Not bravery, not sacrifice, not transformation. It felt like sitting down. We set up in the creek bed, 230 yards east of the tower, in a depression where the bank was high enough to block direct line of sight from the road. Dale positioned Marcus and Jordan on the bank edges as observers. Connie kept Margaret and Eli back against the cut bank, where they were below the sight line. Tanya and Maddie helped me rig the phone. I put it on speaker, called Angie Brandt back. She conferenced in a signal technician at the Madras staging point, who confirmed they could hear my ambient audio and match it against the cell tower registration. "When you start talking," Angie said, "talk at normal volume. You're not broadcasting to the valley. You're broadcasting to whatever is within earshot. The cell signal tells us where you are. The micro-transmitter at the tower tells us where the primary concentration is. We need the 2 points to be far enough apart to open a lane between them. 230 yards. That's enough. Barely. But it's enough. How long do I need to stay on?" Till we confirm the lane is open and the QRF is moving. Could be 20 minutes. Could be 40. I looked up over the creek bank. The night was clear. No moon. The stars visible in a way they hadn't been when the town still had power. To the west, Harmon was dark. No streetlights, no house lights. A town-shaped shadow on the valley floor. To the south, the tower. The flashing red aviation warning light at the top was still blinking, powered by its own solar cell. Below it, the building I'd spent 18 hours inside. The micro-transmitter loop was still playing. I could hear my own voice, faint and tinny, echoing off the concrete walls. Around the base of the building, shapes. Many shapes. Clustered, pressing, pushing against walls that held, and a door that didn't. "Dale," I said. "When they hear me, they'll come this direction." "I know." The creek bed has 3 exit points in a quarter mile. North Fork, South Switchback, and the drainage culvert under Route 7. If they find the bank, we split. You take Marcus, Tanya, and Margaret north. Jordan and Eli go south. Connie, Maddie, and I go through the culvert. And if they don't find the bank, then I just talked for 40 minutes in a ditch for nothing. And we all walked to Madras in the morning. Dale almost smiled. It was the closest thing to humor anyone had produced in 20 hours, and it lasted about half a second before the weight of the situation collapsed it. I sat down in the creek bed with my phone on a flat rock in front of me. The speaker was on. The line was open. Angie Brandt was listening from a military staging area 60 miles east. Somewhere past that, aircraft were waiting. Somewhere past that, someone had looked at a map of Oregon and seen a single AM frequency, painting the location of every monster in a valley, and had decided that the voice behind that frequency was worth flying toward. I started talking, not broadcasting, not reading emergency routes or survival advisories or EAS headers. Just talking. The way I talked at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday when nobody was listening, and the playlist was done, and I had 3 hours to fill before dawn. I talked about Harmon. I talked about the view from the tower at sunrise when the fog sits in the valley and the Cascades turn pink. I talked about Rich Tanaka's coffee, which was terrible, and his taste in music, which was worse. I talked about the sound the building made when the wind came off the pass. A low, resonant hum that blended with the transmitter until you couldn't tell where the machine ended and the weather began. I talked because that was what I did. That was all I'd ever done. 9 years of filling dead air with the sound of a person who was still here, still awake, still willing to sit in the dark and keep company with anyone who needed it. It wasn't a skill. It wasn't expertise. It was just presence, sustained past the point where a reasonable person would have gone to bed. After 8 minutes, the first figures appeared on the ridge above the creek bank, 3 of them, standing at the edge, oriented toward my voice. Not descending. Not yet. Just listening the way they listened, heads tilted, bodies still, locked onto the sound the way a satellite dish locks onto a signal. "I see them," Dale whispered. I kept talking. After 16 minutes, there were 11 on the ridge. The 3 at the tower base had thinned to maybe half. The lane between us was opening. I could feel it. Not see it, feel it. The way you feel a draft before you find the crack. The infected were redistributing, pulled by 2 sound sources in 2 directions, running the gap between them down to empty. Angie's voice low in the phone speaker. "Lane is opening. QRF is spinning up. Keep going, Owen." I kept going. I talked about the first night I ever worked at KVRO, how I'd driven up from Portland in a car with a bad alternator and walked into the building. And Rich had said, "You any good?" And I'd said, "I don't know." And Rich had said, "Perfect. Good people are boring on the air." 24 minutes, 19 on the ridge. Some of them had come down the bank to the waterline upstream. Jordan, on watch, held up a hand. 60 yards and closing. "Dale," I said. "I see them. Not yet." I talked. My voice was cracking. 18 hours plus of sustained speech with nothing but cold coffee and peanuts. The words were getting harder to form, but the sound was still there. The vibration, The presence, the proof of life that a human voice transmits regardless of content. 31 minutes. Angie's voice. QRF is airborne. 2 Blackhawks, ETA 14 minutes. Owen, we need you for 14 more minutes. The ones upstream were 40 yards out now. Close enough that I could see their faces in the starlight. Close enough that the tilted head listening posture was visible in detail. The way the jaw hung slack. The way the eyes were open but unfocused. The way the hands hung at the sides like tools that hadn't been picked up yet. They were moving toward me through 6 inches of creek water, and they made no sound of their own. The only sound in the creek bed was my voice. Dale stood up, axe in hand. He positioned himself between me and the upstream approach and planted his feet in the gravel. "Keep talking," he said. I talked. The helicopters came in low from the east, running without lights until they were directly over the valley. And then the night became noise and wind, an overwhelming mechanical presence. Spotlights from the lead Blackhawk swept the creek bed, the tower, the road. The infected on the ridge turned toward the new sound. All of them simultaneously. That unified pivot that Vera had described from behind her pharmacy counter a lifetime ago. The aircraft sound was louder than my voice. Louder than the micro-transmitter. Louder than anything left in Harmon. The infected abandoned the creek bank and moved toward the helicopters like iron filings toward a magnet. And for the first time in 19 hours, nothing was moving in my direction. A soldier appeared at the top of the creek bank. Female, body armor, rifle, night vision goggles pushed up on her helmet. She looked down at us. 10 civilians in a ditch, 1 bleeding, 1 elderly, 3 of them teenagers, 1 holding a fire axe, and 1 sitting cross-legged on a rock with a phone on speaker. "Owen Marsh?" she said. "That's me." "Ma'am," she said into her radio, "I've got him. 10 souls. 1 litter case, rest ambulatory." They pulled us out of the creek bed in under 4 minutes. Efficient, practiced, the way people move when they've rehearsed the motions, and the motions work. Margaret went on a stretcher. Marcus walked, but a medic took his arm and started field dressing the glass wound immediately. The rest of us climbed the bank and walked to the landing zone the second helicopter had established in the equipment yard north of the tower. As I crossed the yard, I looked back at the building. The ground floor door was gone. Not open, gone, torn from its frame by sustained pressure. The window I'd heard break was a dark hole. Inside, the sound of my recorded voice still played from the micro-transmitter on the ground, looping endlessly. Weather and traffic and song introductions. The after-image of a man who wasn't there anymore, talking to the dark. Angie Brandt was on the second helicopter. She was shorter than her voice suggested. Compact, mid-30s, with close-cropped hair and the focused calm of a person who had been awake as long as I had, and showed it less. She had a laptop open on her knees and a headset around her neck. 14 hours, she said. "I monitored your frequency for 14 hours. Vera Orozco contacted us through a ham radio operator in Bend who was scanning your AM signal. She relayed your broadcasts in real time. We got density maps, movement patterns, behavioral adaptations. You gave us more operational intelligence from a radio booth than our entire regional surveillance network produced in the first 48 hours. I sat down on the helicopter floor. Someone handed me a water bottle. I drank half of it before I could speak. "I didn't know anyone was listening," I said. "Not at that end. I thought I was talking to Harmon. You were talking to Harmon. We were just listening to Harmon listen to you." The helicopter lifted. Through the open door, I watched the tower fall away. The blinking red light at the top still pulsing, the building dark, the road below alive with shapes moving toward the noise of the rotors. We rose above them. We rose above the valley. The Cascades caught the first gray light from the east. And below us, Harmon was a dark grid of streets and houses and lives I'd spent 19 hours trying to keep connected to each other with nothing but a microphone and the electricity to power it. "Vera." I pulled out my phone. 2% battery. I called her number. She picked up on the first ring. "Are you out?" she said. "I'm out. Helicopter, east toward Madras. Vera, are you safe? The pharmacy held. The military team cleared my block 20 minutes ago. They're working west through downtown. She paused. Owen, yeah, you did something tonight. I talked. That's all I ever do. No, you stayed. She hung up. Dale sat across from me on the helicopter floor, the fire axe across his knees, his eyes closed. Connie was beside him, her broken wrist cradled against her chest, her face turned toward the open door and the passing dark. Margaret was strapped to the stretcher with her eyes open, one hand resting on the tote bag in her lap. Jordan sat with his knees pulled up, exhaustion finally overtaking the vigilance he'd maintained for 20 hours. Eli leaned against Maddie, and Maddie leaned against the bulkhead, and neither of them was asleep, but neither of them was fully conscious either, occupying some middle state that the body invents when the danger subsides and the adrenaline withdraws and there is nothing left to react to. Marcus looked at his bandaged arm, turned it over, looked at it again. Glass, not teeth. The distinction still mattered. The distinction was everything. I closed my eyes. The helicopter engines filled the space where my voice had been, and for the first time, in 19 hours, I let the silence hold. They tell me the micro-transmitter loop played for another 11 hours before the battery died. 11 hours of my voice cycling through weather and traffic and song introductions inside a building that had already been breached and emptied and occupied by things that stood in the broadcast room and listened to the sound of a man who wasn't there. I don't know what they heard. I don't know if hearing is even the right word for what they did with sound. But I know my voice was the last human signal inside that building. And by the time the battery died, the QRF had cleared 6 blocks of Central Harmon and established a forward aid station at the pharmacy on 5th and Millard, where Vera Orozco unlocked the steel security gate and started handing out antibiotics to the medics who arrived. I don't do radio anymore. It's not that I can't. There's a communications unit at the Madras camp that has an FM rig, and they've offered me a slot twice. I've said no both times, and the reason is hard to explain to people who weren't there. It's not trauma. It's not fear. It's that I spent 9 years believing I was filling silence, and on that night, I learned I was never filling anything. The silence was full the whole time. People were in it. They were listening. They were waiting. And the only thing my voice ever did was let them know they weren't alone, in a room they were never actually alone in. I sit outside the tent most nights after dark. The air is dry, and the stars are clear, and somewhere to the west, across the Cascades, there is a tower with a blinking red light that no one has turned off. I think about the dead air, the 11 seconds of silence after the EAS alert, when I sat with an open mic and didn't speak. The worst 11 seconds of my professional life. The moment I understood that silence was the only thing that could kill a station. I was wrong about that too. Silence didn't kill anything. My voice didn't save anything. What saved us was the fact that someone was listening on a frequency I didn't know existed, relaying words I didn't know were being relayed, building a picture I couldn't see from a signal I thought was disappearing into the dark. The dark was listening. The dark was always listening. I just didn't know it until someone told me.